So, yeah, your voice is audible and we can hear you.
Okay. Okay, so let me just begin. There are already 12 people who have joined. Yeah, so now before we begin with the second session, uh, just wanted to call out that thank you for everyone who has submitted the assessments. And I can see there are like 3 people who have scored 15 on 15. And their names are Jinal, Nayan, and Krishma. So congratulations for scoring 15 on 15 in the assignments. Um, Rest, those who have not yet submitted, please do so. After this session today, or maybe by tomorrow, because there will be new assignment that will be shared for after today's session as well, which we would request you to fill before the next sessions begins. Okay, so I'll just quickly share my screen and we can then begin. Okay, so today's session is going to be on finalization adjustments and grant accounting for non-profit specifically. Okay, like last time, I would again encourage कि please participate during the sessions, and if you have any questions, queries, or if you have any doubts, either you can unmute yourself and talk, or else feel free to type it in the chat box. I'll ensure your queries are addressed. Yeah, may I request all the participants to keep themselves on mute during the session. If you have any questions, please feel free to unmute yourself and we can discuss. Okay, so before we begin today's session on finalization adjustments, तो पहले तो ये समझते हैं कि अकाउंटिंग फाइनलाइजेशन का प्रोसेस फ्लो क्या रहता है टिपिकली व्हाट इज द एंड टू एंड प्रोसेस फ्लो व्हेन इट कम्स टू अकाउंटिंग एंड till the time the finalization happens. So first, usually a transaction occurs, like example, कुछ डोनेशन रिसीव हुआ या सर्विस दी है या पेमेंट हुए हैं which is a non-profit undertakes. That transaction occurs. After that, the journal entry gets recorded for the transaction that has happened. Journal entry pass करते समय we refer to the golden principles, golden rules, and the accounting principles which we discussed in session number 1. उसके बाद जर्नल से अकाउंट्स पोस्ट होते हैं लेजर्स में. Okay, each account gets posted to respective ledgers. Thereafter, there are certain adjustment entries which are again a critical part when it comes to finalizing the books of accounts. Like example, prepaid expenses हो गए या आउटस्टैंडिंग एक्सपेंसेस रिसीवेबल्स बुक करने हैं, एडवांसेस किसी से रिसीव होते हैं, प्रोविजंस क्रिएट किए जाते हैं. Typically, these are the adjustment entries when it comes to finalization of books. Thereafter, there is a reconciliation process that happens typically with bank statements, donor utilization reports, donor agreement के साथ reconciliation होते हैं, vendors के साथ reconciliation होते हैं, staff balances देखे जाते हैं, if there are any advances paid to staff, all those accounts get reconciled with our books, even with statutory duties that we paid, like example TDS काटा तो TDS पोर्टल से हम रिकंसाइल करते हैं हमारे बुक्स में, GST के पोर्टल से भी बुक्स रिकंसाइल होते हैं. So that is a process that we undertake. Thereafter, all the ledgers get reviewed कि कोई नेगेटिव बैलेंसेस है तो उसको रेक्टिफाई किया जाता है, कोई एरर्स एंड ओमिशंस हुए हैं उसको रेक्टिफाई किया जाता है. इसके बाद ट्रायल बैलेंस बनता है which no which basically matches, like all the debits will equal to credit when it comes to trial balance. कोई सस्पेंस अकाउंट्स है तो उसको क्लियर किया जाता है, एंड देन आफ्टर दैट वी प्रिपेयर द फाइनेंशियल स्टेटमेंट्स which includes income and expenditure, बैलेंस शीट हो गया, receipts and payments हो गए, notes to accounts and disclosures. Okay, after the financial statements are prepared, then the review happens, audit takes place. ऑडिट क्वेरीज रिजॉल्व होने के बाद सारे अकाउंट्स फ्रीज हो जाते हैं और बुक्स क्लोज हो जाते हैं, बेसिकली बुक्स फ्रीज हो जाते हैं, एंड देन द ऑडिटेड फाइनेंशियल स्टेटमेंट्स गेट अप्रूव्ड बाय द बोर्ड और ट्रस्टीज, एंड सब्सिक्वेंटली the financial statements can be shared with external stakeholders like donors or the public authorities that we deal with, and be it income tax and or charity commissioner and so on. So this is the entire process flow when it comes to account, right from a transaction taking place till the time the uh, books are approved and the financial statements are approved by the board. So today we are going to talk about, first half of the session we are going to focus on adjusting entries. ओके, ये एडजस्टिंग एंट्रीज क्या होते हैं जो हमको पता रहनी चाहिए व्हेन इट कम्स टू फाइनलाइजेशन ऑफ अकाउंट्स. Okay, so let's begin with prepaid expenses. Okay, can somebody tell me like what are prepaid expenses? Can you just unmute and share, or if you want to type it in the chat box, please feel free to do that. What are prepaid expenses?
Insurance.
Okay. Okay. Anyone else? Yeah, so typically insurance is an example of prepaid expenses. So when it comes to prepaid expenses, the payments which are made in advance for expenses that relate to future accounting period. Okay, उसको हम prepaid expenses करके classify करके record करते हैं. ये concept again is coming out from matching concept or accrual concept that we discussed in first session. Okay, वहां से ये that basically triggers this prepaid expenses recording and booking in our books. क्योंकि prepaid expenses का benefit future period में होने वाला है, and it is not yet, it doesn't get consumed in the current financial year. It is treated as an asset for the non-profit. Okay, now let's understand this with an example. Suppose एक non-profit ने 12 lakh rupees insurance premium pay किया है as on 1st January. Okay, now the insurance is typically for 1 year. Now if when we close the books on 31st March, okay, now because the benefits of that insurance have been consumed for say Jan, Feb, March, we recognize the insurance premium as an expense for those first 3 months, but the pending 9 months is recorded as prepaid expense. It's an asset for the non-profit basically, क्योंकि उसके benefits derive होने वाले हैं अगले साल, in the subsequent period for the next 9 months. That's why we book it as prepaid expense as on 31st March. Okay, now let's understand how do we record such prepaid expenses and what are the implications in our financial statements. ओके, सेम एग्जांपल अगर हम देखेंगे तो जर्नल हम रिकॉर्ड कैसे करेंगे, जैसे हम प्रीपेड एक्सपेंस जब भी पे करते हैं, इंश्योरेंस प्रीमियम पे किया 1st Jan के लिए, कोई बता पाएगा व्हाट विल यू डेबिट एंड व्हाट विल यू क्रेडिट व्हेन यू मेक द इंश्योरेंस प्रीमियम पेमेंट ऑफ 12 lakh rupees on 1st January? How will you record this transaction? Can anyone unmute and share as per the golden rules? Yes,
Am I
Jitin.
audible?
Yeah.
If we have to create the vendor, if we have to credit the vendor, then we will book the invoice first, which is going to be insurance expenses account debit to the extent of pertaining to that particular financial year.
Okay.
Expenses pertaining to that year. Then we are going to debit the prepaid expenses and which are belonging to the next financial year.
Right.
Then if GST is applicable, we will debit the input tax credit if
Right.
eligible, and we will credit the vendor of that insurance, whatever insurance company we are taking. And
Okay.
While making payment, we will debit the vendor and credit the bank.
Perfect. Yeah, that's right. So when we make the payment on 1st January, typically we will book it as asset because on 1st January the expense is not really accrued, is not been incurred. We have just made the payment on 1st January. So typically we will debit prepaid expense account, and since the payment is made directly to the vendor in this case, which is insurance company, we will credit the bank account. So जो golden rule apply होगा, debit the receiver of advance, which is the insurance company. Prepaid expense is a representative personal account for the insurance company. Okay, and credit the bank because credit the giver. Okay, both we will show reported under current asset in our balance sheet, 12 lakh rupees. And then as on 31st March, typically when if we are closing the books on annual basis, then whatever expense has been accrued up to 31st March, which is for 3 months, we will book it as an expense, which is of 3 lakh rupees. Again, debit the expense because insurance expense is a nominal account. We will book it under expense in our income expenditure, and we will credit prepaid expense to that extent to reduce the prepaid expense asset from 12 lakh rupees to 9 lakh rupees net. So when you combine these entries, the entry would be the same as what Jinal explained. It will be insurance expense account debit 3 lakh, prepaid expense debit 9 lakhs, which will be the net effect, which will reflect in our balance sheet under current asset to bank account because the payment has already been made on 1st January. Okay, is this clear everyone? किसी को कोई doubts है इस पे? Okay. So let's move on to the next adjusting entry, which is commonly we face is outstanding payables or accrued expenses. Can somebody tell me like what are these accrued expenses? What are outstanding payables? For a non-profit, what does this mean?
Those are the expenses which are incurred for that particular financial year, but the payment is yet to be made.
Yeah. Yes, expense related to the current period but not paid. Yes. So when a service has been received today but payment will be made later, okay, we will book it as expense, but because it is not paid, we will show it as payable. So basically, these are expenses that relate to the current accounting period, but that remains unpaid at the time of closing of the books of accounts. Okay, if since we are closing on 31st March, so 31st March को जो भी outstanding payables दिखते हैं जो unpaid है, लेकिन service हमने ली है उसकी, हमने expense भी book कर दिया है, but we owe that money to somebody, and it is our liability. Hence, we record it as outstanding payable under the liability side. Typical example, what we'll see is that electricity bill. मार्च मंथ का जब भी बिल आता है तो 31st मार्च तक का बिल रेज होता है कभी कभी इन द एज ऑफ 31st मार्च फॉर द मंथ ऑफ मार्च, बट पेमेंट इज required to be made in the subsequent month. The due date is usually later on. But because this expense pertains to the month of March, we are required to book that expense in the month of March and show it as outstanding payable as of 31st March. Okay. now how will we book the entry for this? Okay, जब भी invoice आता है electricity bill का to a non-profit, how will you book this expense? Can somebody tell me like what will you debit and what will you credit? You have to book the expense as on 31st March, but it remains unpaid. Using the golden rules, what will you debit and what will you credit? Anyone? Can somebody just put it in the chat box? Which ledger account will you debit here? The expense has already been incurred, which is electricity, but it remains outstanding as on 31st March. Which ledger account will you debit? Okay, yeah, debit expense and credit outstanding provision expense. Okay, So yeah, so typically, because in this example, Gina, since we have received the bill, we will not create a provision here because we have already received the bill on 31st March. So we will book it as electricity expense payable credit, which will be we show it as current liability. By using the golden rule, credit the giver of service and debit the expense, which is electricity expense. Okay, and जब भी हम पेमेंट करेंगे इसका तो it's a straightforward entry on 7th April. It will be electricity expense payable account debit. That is the liability we will knock off against the payment made through using bank account. Bank account will credit because credit the giver of payment, which is the bank in this case, and uh, debit the receiver of payment, which is the electricity company. And electricity expense payable is a representative personal account for the electricity company here. Okay, is this clear? किसी का कोई questions है? Okay. Now, since we have spoken about outstanding payables, let's talk about provision as well. Okay. Now, provision is something that we book when a non-profit expects to pay something in future, even though as on today, the exact amount may not be known, or the bill has not been received, or the expense relates to the current year, but payment will be made in the next year. So typically, provisions are made for those expenses which are certain, but amount may not be known as of today. That's the conservative principle that becomes applicable when it comes to booking of provision of expenses. एग्जाम्पल लेते हैं तो हम प्रोविजन क्रिएट करते हैं ऑडिट फीस के लिए एज ऑफ 31st मार्च टिपिकली, क्योंकि ऑडिट भले ही होता है, ऑडिट गेट्स carried on by the auditor only in the month of say July, August, September. However, it pertains to the previous financial year. Hence, as on 31st March, we typically create a provision in our books. Similar example is for gratuity provision. Okay, the law says that gratuity becomes payable to all the employees, say after a period of say 5 years. But because every year there is some kind of expense that is getting incurred, though the amount may not be known at this stage, but we are still required to create a provision in our books of accounts for the staff retirement benefits. Basically, that gets accumulated every year, but not really becomes payable at the end of each year. And also, the amount is not really known. What amount needs to be paid to whom, because it is contingent upon various other factors. So these are typical examples of provision for expenses. Okay. Again, this journal entries are quite straightforward for provision for expenses. Just like outstanding payables, we book expense and create a liability for the outstanding payable. For provisions, we book the expense. जैसे अगर audit fee हो गया तो we will debit audit fees, which is an expense. It will be reflected on the income and expenditure debit side, expense side, and will credit provision for audit fees under the current liability in the balance sheet. Similar example for gratuity, we will book gratuity expense year on year on the debit side of income and expenditure expense side, and then create a provision in the balance sheet. Because this is gratuity, it is typically recorded as a non-current liability because it becomes payable after 5 years of employees working in an organization. Okay, now if we see the key difference in outstanding and provision, in outstanding expenses, the amount is known exactly, whereas in the provision, the amount may not be known. It's an estimated provision that we create. Outstanding expenses में bill receive हुआ रहता है, but provision में bill is not yet received, and the liability is quite certain when it comes to outstanding expense. But in case of provision, it is an estimated liability. It is not certain as on the date of booking of provision. Okay, is this clear? किसी को कोई doubts, questions है ये concepts में provision versus outstanding?
For gratuity,
Yeah.
is it going to be always non-current?
So typically it will be non-current, but if something is becoming due, no, as per the, so there is statistical methods to be very frank, or if the non-profit knows that somebody is about to leave as on the date of signing of financial statements and the liability is going to be paid to that person, then yes, then that portion we should ideally book it as current liability in our balance sheet.
Okay.
Yeah. So typically we use the 1 year provision. If something is payable for more than 1 year, um, after 1 year, we typically report it as non-current. But something is due within for less than 1 month, 1 year period, then yes, we report it under current liability. Okay. Okay. So next topic is again from a finalization adjustment perspective, depreciation, जो हम typically at the end of the year जब भी हम books हमारे close करते हैं तभी हम depreciation booking record करते हैं हमारे books में. So can anybody tell me like what do you understand by depreciation? In simple terms, what is depreciation? Anyone?
Because assets gets utilized and used up, so thoda sa wear and tear hota hai.
Wear and tear.
So
Sure.
yeah, so we
Sure.
just reduce the value of the assets according to that.
Yeah, perfect. So it is decrease in value of assets, change in value due to wear and tear. Yes. So basically depreciation is nothing but allocation of cost of an asset over its useful life. Okay. It represents basically the decrease in value of fixed asset due to, like we said, usage, wear and tear, passage of time, or just obsolescence. So instead of charging the full cost of an asset in the year of purchase, it gets divided across the useful life of the asset. Again, this comes out from the matching concept that we spoke about in session number 1. जैसे ही ये asset कोई use हो रहा है over a period of say multiple years, because the benefits are derived of using that asset over a period of time, the expense also gets booked over a period of time. Okay, that is what matching concept really talks about, and hence there is this concept called depreciation that we book it in our books year on year. Okay, of course this helps avoiding overstating or the surplus benefit for the year. We will see, so there are, see in the subsequent slide with some example. So when it comes to methods of depreciation, typically there are two methods usually that we follow. Like you all would be knowing, one is written down value method, WDV what we call, and other is SLM method, straight line method. तो समझते हैं WDV method क्या होती है? In written down value method, a fixed percentage is applied each year on the reducing balance of the asset. Okay, depreciation in this case decreases year on year, and the asset value never becomes zero in this case. अगर एग्जाम्पल के तहत देखते हैं तो अगर कॉस्ट है से 100 rupees for an asset and depreciation rate is say 10%. So in first year it will be 10% on 100 rupees, which is 10 rupees. So the written down value would reduce from 100 to 90 rupees. Okay, for year 2. Now the 10% will be calculated on the 90 rupees, which is the WDV value in year 2, which is 9 rupees. So the WDV value of the asset in year 3 would be 81 rupees. So in year 3, the depreciation will be 10% of 81, which is 8.1, and so on and so forth. Okay, तो इस केस में कभी भी asset का value zero नहीं हो सकता, because it is always a percentage of the opening carried forward balance from the previous year. Okay, whereas in case of straight line method, okay, same amount of depreciation gets charged every year. यहाँ पे asset value may be reduced to zero or the scrap value. So, there is an estimation of scrap value for the asset at the time of purchase itself when we are recording that asset in our books and arriving at the amount of depreciation year on year. We estimate a scrap value, and then the straight line method depreciation value is arrived at by using this formula which is given here, which is cost minus the estimated scrap value at the end of useful life, and we divide this by the useful life to arrive at the amount which needs to be depreciated year on year. इस केस में क्या होता है कि proportionate depreciation is it gets allocated to expense to the income and expenditure on the as an expense, and the amount remains fixed, unlike written down value method. Okay, let's look at it from an example perspective. So again, 100 rupees fixed asset having an estimated scrap value of rupees 10 at the end of say 10th year. So how will we arrive at the depreciation value? Is that cost which is 10 minus the estimated scrap value which is 10, sorry, cost which is 100 minus the estimated scrap value which is rupees 10, will divide by 10 years. So we will arrive at 9 rupees per annum as the depreciation value, and every year हम 9 rupees से depreciate करेंगे basically this asset value. So this is again one other method of recording depreciation in the books of accounts. Okay, anybody has any questions?
Rate of depreciation will be as per Schedule 2.
Yeah, so if you are a Section 8 company, then you will have to follow the Companies Act, जहाँ पे सारे rates दिए गए हैं as per the nature of assets, equipments, office equipments, laptops, and so on and so forth, building and electrical equipment and so on and so forth. So those rates you have to follow. For other than Section 8 companies, typically we use the income tax rates that are given as per the Income Tax Act. Anybody else has any questions? Okay. Now, how will we book depreciation in the books of accounts? Okay, so it's again a straightforward entry. Because depreciation is an expense, we debit the expense. It's a nominal account, and no fixed asset which is getting used over a period. So value of fixed asset reduces. So credit what goes out, because fixed asset is a real account, and that's what we credit when it comes to booking of depreciation entry. So it's a quite straightforward entry. Fixed asset we recorded under non-current assets in our balance sheet, तो वहां से reduce हो जाएगा उतना amount to the extent of depreciation, and yeah, and on the income and expenditure debit side, we will book that amount as a depreciation. Okay, so now these are the adjustment entries that we spoke about from the expenditure side so far: outstandings, provisions, depreciation, prepaid as expense, and all. Now let's look at it from a income side as well. Income receivable and income accrued, what we typically call. So for a non-profit, typically, or rather for any organization, income receivable is an amount of income that is earned during the year but not yet received. So for a non-profit, typical example is the bank interest that we earn on fixed deposits. Okay, this is a pure case of this adjustment entry that we need to ensure that we book it at the time of on 31st March, especially when accrued books are maintained on accrual basis. This adjustment entry becomes critical. Again, this concept is again derived from the accrual concept that we spoke about in session 1. Now, why do we do this? Why do we book income receivable or accrued interest? Is because that income pertains to that financial year in which it is earned, even though we may not have received that amount into our bank account. Okay, जैसे हम fixed deposits रखते हैं, तो every year इंटरेस्ट हम अर्न करते हैं, लेकिन कभी कभी ऐसे भी होता है कि फिक्स्ड डिपॉजिट्स interest will be received only at the time of maturity of fixed deposit, which could be, say, at the end of 18 months to 2 years, or at the end of 1 year, which would go beyond 31st March ka date on which we close the books. So in these cases we will have to record those income, those income receivable amounts as on 31st March by reconciling it with the bank statements or other fixed deposit statements. Okay, other example could be like अगर कोई एनजीओ ट्रेनिंग देती है, ओके, ट्रेनिंग भले ही दी है इन द मंथ ऑफ मार्च और बिफोर मार्च, लेकिन बेनिफिशियरी ने अगर पैसा नहीं दिया है, द फी हैज नॉट बीन पेड येट टू द नॉन प्रॉफिट, तो इवन बिकॉज वी हैव incurred expense, we have basically conducted the event, we will have to book it as income receivable as on 31st March, even though money we would have not received on that date. Okay, so if we look at it from a recording perspective, so what would be the journal entry? Can anybody tell me if there is interest accrued on fixed deposit held by a non-profit? What will you debit and what will you credit? Anyone? Suppose your non-profit has kept a fixed deposit with a bank और उसकी maturity है say 2 years, and you have selected कि you will receive interest only at the end of 2 years and not before that. So as of 31st March, money is not hitting your bank account, but still it is getting accrued on that fixed deposit that you are holding. So what will you debit in this case and what will you credit? Okay, accrued interest account debit to bank interest account. Okay, accrued interest bank FD to interest accrued FD interest income credit. Yeah, so typically we'll book the income as on 31st March because it is accrued as on 31st March. So going by the golden rule, credit the income, we will credit interest income accrued ledger account, and we will debit FD interest receivable by using the rule debit the receiver. In this case, the receiver is the bank. Basically our money is held with the bank, so FD interest receivable account we will debit by using the golden rule of personal account, debit the receiver, which is shown under current asset, and interest income under income in the income and expenditure statement. Similarly, जैसे हम ट्रेनिंग फी रिसीवेबल अगर हम बुक करते हैं, so in that case also we will credit the training fees ledger, which is income, credit the income, and because it is receivable from the beneficiary, we will book it as training fee receivable debit or beneficiary account debit, using the golden rule of personal account, debit the receiver of service, and it will get reflected in your current asset side in your balance sheet. Okay, is this clear? किसी को कोई questions है, कोई doubts है अब तक जो हमने discuss किया है?
In case of training fees, if
Yeah.
the training is provided, is trust not supposed to raise an invoice immediately rather than booking it as a training fee receivable?
Yeah, right. So if you're raising an invoice, then you will book it as no the same entry, right? At the time of booking of invoice, even though you would have not received the money on that date. So you will book the income by crediting training fees ledger on the income side, and you will have to debit the person who is supposed to pay you, from whom you are about to receive the money, right, in future.
Okay. And if the training has started in the month of March, but that training session is going to continue till next year, let's say maybe till May of next year, in that case, is it supposed to book the partial training fees as receivable or accrued, or how are we supposed to do if the invoice is raised in both this scenario, how the accounting will go?
Yeah, no, it's a very good question, very practical question. So typically, no, it will depend on what are the terms of that training. Is it like a continuous training that you are providing, and which is just overlapping multiple months, and as of 31st March, no, suppose there are like three trainings, example, and one training has been done in the previous year, two trainings are done in the subsequent year. Then typically, as the right method of accounting would be to accrue partial income as on 31st March, and and accrue the remaining income after 31st March. That is the right way. Even though invoice you would raise it at the end of the year, but the right way of accounting is that because the income gets accrued as per the schedule that has been agreed, you would typically book it as income for that proportionate period. Though practically, I would say a lot of organizations link the accounting with the raising of invoice, and no, typically they would book the invoice only at the time of raising, which is in the month of May in your example. But no, I've seen many auditors objecting to no, this kind of treatment when it is very clear from the agreement with the beneficiaries that the training will be provided over a period of time, but only the invoice, just because invoice is getting raised at the end, that doesn't mean that we don't account it on our books on 31st March for the period, for the the income that is typically earned during that period.
Okay.
Yeah.
And how do we identify if the training is divided in the session? Let's say if it is uh, the current training that we are doing, let's say
Yeah.
this educational training. How do you identify that this is section wise, or when are you supposed to book the income and not at the end when the invoice is raised? How do we identify that?
Yeah. So typically, see, it will depend on the event of training. So if it is a continuous training, then proportionate income should be booked. But if it is linked to, you know, the preparation, maybe, like there are 10 sessions, example. Okay, three are in the previous financial year, seven are in the subsequent financial year. And if three sessions have already been held, then I would go by the rule of booking proportionate income pertaining to the three trainings. But if it is ambiguous, it is not clear, like, what are the, if there are a number of sessions, or if, it is not clear, like, what has really happened in the previous year and the next year, and what will happen in the subsequent year, then probably a best judgment will have to be used in terms of bifurcating that income. And if it is estimated that most of the uh, the income, rather most of the things will get happened in the subsequent year, even though the period has started, not in the case of trading, but any other case of any other income, maybe uh, if the work has started in the previous year, but actually the income will get earned only in the subsequent year after completing certain events, then you would have to book that income only after completion of that event and not before that. So the answer will depend on how that agreement you are in, what are the clauses that you have in the agreement, what are the um, arrangement between the two parties, really, to recognize income in this case.
Okay.
Yeah. Anybody else has any questions so far? Okay. So we spoke about expenses and incomes. तो उसके अलावा भी there are certain other key adjustment entries which require separate disclosures in our books of accounts. जैसे कोई prior, some examples are prior period items. ओके किसी किसी चीज किसी ट्रांजैक्शन का अगर रिकॉर्डिंग नहीं हुआ हो इन द प्रीवियस ईयर बट इट हैज बीन subsequently realized that the recording was missed or by error or by for whatever reasons, and the books of accounts are closed for the previous year, then you need to book it separately in the current financial year and disclose it as a prior period adjustment entry. Okay, this is again a very typical example where separate disclosure is mandatorily required. We should not club it together with the same head in which the current year's expenses are booked. Now we need to disclose it separately as prior period items so that anybody reading the financial statements gets to know that this expense is, even though it is booked in current year, but it pertains to the previous period. Okay, then there are other examples like advances received from say beneficiary या customer हो गया या advance paid to a vendor. Even this will be recorded separately in the books of accounts. Um, then there is an example of transfer of surplus or deficit from income and expenditure to balance sheet. Okay, ये जो adjustment entry है, typically this is handled by our accounting software. Like if you are using Tally, automatically the amount gets transferred from income and expenditure balance amount to the reserve and surplus in the balance sheet. But something that we all need to know is that this is also an adjustment entry required when it comes to finalization of accounts. And then there is this adjustment of grants utilized as per the fund accounting methodology. तो हमारा session second part of today's session we will cover the accounting for grants and funds that a non-profit typically receive. Again, this is very important and critical topic when it comes to non-profit and quite unique for non-profits, if you say, because we receive restricted funds from the donors, right? So it's important that the accounting, how we account for such restricted funds, give true and fair picture when it comes to income and expenditure account. So that's on something that we will discuss in detail. Uh, after a short break of 5 minutes after this first half of today's session. If anybody has any questions, doubts, or any queries या कोई discuss करना चाहेंगे, we can talk about it now before we go for a short break. किसी के कोई questions है? Anybody has any questions? Okay, so in that case, then we'll just break for 5 minutes and we can then restart. So what's the time now? Yeah, we can restart at 3:20. Is that fine? Okay, we'll meet at 3:20. is back. Okay, so the second topic for today is fund accounting for grants. Okay, so before we begin this topic, can somebody tell me like what is the meaning of fund? What do you understand by the term fund? हमने बहुत जगह देखा रहेगा हमारे जब भी फाइनेंशियल स्टेटमेंट हम बनाते हैं बैलेंस शीट की हमने देखा रहेगा कि there are various kind of funds that we typically record. But before we get into the details of what are the different types of restricted funds or other unrestricted funds, what is a fund? Okay, money collected from public. Okay. Anybody else? Anyone else wants to try? Okay, so fund is nothing but a pool of money which is set aside for a specific purpose. Okay, that's the simple meaning of fund. Fund is it is a liability that a non-profit has to spend in future. Okay, that's why we typically record fund on the liability side of balance sheet. Okay, it cannot be construed as income for a non-profit unless it is actually spent for the purpose for which it has been received from the donor. Okay, typical examples of funds are restricted donor funds. जैसे grants हो गए, grants जो restricted funds रहते हैं with a specific direction that it has to be used for so and so purposes only. Those are typical examples of restricted funds. Okay, या फिर कोई donation कोई देता है with a specific clause saying that it has to be used towards a particular object only and not to be used for anything else is again an example of no donation with a restricted rather a restricted donation or a restricted fund. Okay, now when we talk about accounting for fund, it is nothing but it is a systematic way in which funds gets recorded and tracked in the books of accounts. Like it enables classification of restricted versus unrestricted in our books. It also helps in tracking utilization of each fund separately. That is what fund accounting is all about. Okay, it ensures the funds are also utilized towards the specific purpose for which it has been received. Okay, so this is the meaning of fund and fund accounting, which we will be talking about in detail in the subsequent slides. So before we move ahead, can you just type in the chat box like which method are you following currently in your current organization? Is it like accrual basis with fund accounting? Is it accrual basis without fund accounting? Are you following cash basis or you're not sure at this stage? You can just type option A, B, C or D in the chat box. Is your organization following accrual basis with fund accounting? Without fund accounting? Is it cash basis? Or are you not sure at this stage? Chat box में आप ऑप्शन टाइप कर सकते हो प्लीज either A, B, C or D. Okay. Okay. D, you're unsure at this stage. Okay. Rest of the people A, okay. Accrual basis with fund accounting. Okay, not sure. Okay, perfect. So most of the people currently are not sure, though there are various options that are getting selected, but looks like you're unsure at this stage whether it is cash basis or whether it's accrual basis with fund accounting or without fund accounting. Yeah, so if somebody is following cash basis, then it's a very straightforward and clean method. वहां पे ये accrual का concept ही नहीं आता पहली बात तो fund accounting का भी concept वहां पे नहीं आता क्योंकि जैसे ही the money comes in on cash basis you record it as your income and when you spend the money on cash basis you record the expense. It's a very straightforward method without any ambiguity. But when it comes to accrual accounting, we need to see, and in the subsequent slides we will discuss the what is fund accounting, and then probably you can go back and look at what your organization is currently following. Is it accrual basis with fund accounting, or is it accrual basis तो कर रहे हैं लेकिन fund accounting हम follow नहीं कर रहे हैं, which is the prescribed method for recording restricted grants. Okay, now before that, let's just understand the applicability of fund accounting. So it is applicable to all non-profits that receive restricted grant funds from donors, but only those non-profits which are following accrual method. Okay, जो भी follow कर रहे हैं accrual method, उनको ideally फंड अकाउंटिंग भी फॉलो करना चाहिए. अगर आप फंड अकाउंटिंग नहीं फॉलो कर रहे हो, then it is inconsistent with the very concept of accrual books of accounts. Okay, again, this entire thing, this fund accounting that we will be talking about, it is not a mandatory practice at this stage in India. It is a recommended practice, and it has been prescribed by ICAI in its technical guide for accounting, specifically for non-profit organizations in India. Okay, उसके अंदर ये recommended practice है, but again it is not a mandatory practice at this stage in India. Okay, there is also one accounting standard called as AS12, which talks about government grants. But again, it is only applicable to government grants. It is not applicable to any donor giving any grants to a non-profit. Okay, so this is the background of the fund accounting principle that we will be talking about. It's a recommended and a best practice for any non-profit which is following accrual basis accounting. But again, not a mandatory practice. Hence, you will find some organizations, not sure about how to go about it, or they want to do but they don't know how to do it, and how to record those record certain transactions, and hence do not follow fund accounting methodology. Okay, so before we proceed, some key concepts that we all need to understand when it comes to fund accounting. One is unrestricted funds. ये वो funds है which come with without any specific restrictions on its usage. Okay, it is received either for non-profits, general purpose, or self-sustainability over the years. Okay, these are unrestricted funds without any restrictions. But whereas restricted funds are typically received for a specific purpose only. Now, what this specific purpose could be, it could be any of the projects run by a non-profit, or any specific activity undertaken by a non-profit, or any specific object covered in the trust deed or a memorandum of association of the non-profit. Okay, it could be any of these reasons. Okay, so before we understand what the fund accounting is, now let's just imagine a situation. What happens if a non-profit does not follow fund accounting? Okay, so a non-profit is following accrual method of accounting but not following fund accounting for whatever reason. अभी ये करने से क्या issues होते हैं? Let's first try to understand those issues first, so that we understand the importance of fund accounting in a better manner. Suppose एक non-profit receives say 100 rupees of restricted funds in year 1. Okay, out of which only 20 rupees are spent in year 1 and 80 rupees are spent in year 2. Okay, 100 rupees non-profit receives as restricted funds, but in year 1 it only spends 20 rupees, and in year 2 it spends 80 rupees. Now imagine if this non-profit is not following fund accounting, then what will happen? So in first year, it will book 100 rupees as its income, okay, because it has received 100 rupees in year 1 on the income side. But in year 1, because it has spent only 20 rupees, it will book 20 as an expense. Okay. Now, when it balances its books at the year end, there will be a surplus that will get recorded in year 1. which is 80 rupees. Okay, this is year 1. Now in year 2, what will happen? When it spends 80 rupees, it will book 80 as an expense on the debit side, income and expenditure, and there will be no income in year 2 because income entirely we have booked it in year 1 itself. Now in year 2, there will be a loss or rather deficit of 80 rupees in year 2 that will get recorded. So in year 1 it will be a surplus of 80 and in year 2 there will be a deficit of 80. Now the question is this giving a right picture for this restricted fund that we have received in 100 rupees? Yeah, so it's not a matching concept that we are practicing here. So it is giving a distorted figure. In year 1 there is basically income gets overstated basically in year 1, hence there is a surplus that is getting generated in year 1, but whereas it is not a surplus. 80 rupees also this NGO has to spend in subsequently, so it is not a surplus typically for the non-profit, right? So these are some of the issues that come up when when a non-profit is not following fund accounting. The very fundamental principle of matching concept is not getting applied here. Okay, so so this 100 rupees, now if we see, this is basically not our income. It is not not the income in the first year. There is still an obligation for the non-profit to spend that money. So it is a liability till the time the organization spends the money. It should ideally be reflected as a liability for the non-profit because it is obligated to spend it subsequently. And till the time it spends it, it should not be recorded as its income in the first place. Okay, that's the right way, which we'll be discussing in detail. So everybody got this concept, right? What are the typical issues when it comes to a non-profit not following fund accounting? Anybody has any questions so far?
Yes, I have a question.
Yeah.
When you say then, if it is not mandatory, but the basic accounting principles are not followed, then how it is not mandatory? It should be mandatory, right? I mean, to
Correct,
follow this.
correct. Yeah, right. Ideally, it should be mandatory, absolutely, but even the Companies Act, if you see, has not made it mandatory as such. Of course, the accounting principles are something that come out from the accounting standards, but it is not it is not something that has been mandated under any of the laws that govern a non-profit at this stage. Even ICS technical guidelines that are there, are not mandatory in nature. That if a non-profit is not following, there are no penal consequences for that. It will not give a true and fair view basically of the books of accounts, and auditors may also put it as a disclosure or as a remark in their audit report. So those are the implications at this stage that we have. And this is again, from Indian context purely, because if you see, how the accounting standards have evolved and how the reporting structures have evolved in, most of the countries, or rather, in US, UK, probably, where the systems are more mature when it comes to non-profits compliance and reporting. There it is, quite it is basically mandatory to have certain way in which the books of accounts are prepared, and financial statements get prepared and published for the non-profits. Yes, Rupesh.
Yeah, so so when we show it as an earmark fund, so is it the right method to do this correctly?
Yeah, absolutely. We will be talking about this earmark fund in the subsequent slides.
Okay,
This concept will get clearer.
yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Anybody else has any questions? Okay. Okay, so now with this background, so now a reflective question for all of you. In your books of accounts, what will be the journal entry for restricted grant funds then? If we have to report restricted funds in our books, and looking at the drawbacks in the previous slide, what will be what is the right journal entry out of these two options that you think that will form basis for fund accounting? Is it bank account debit to donation income, or is it bank account debit to earmarked fund? Or if you're not sure, you can just type 3 or other C in the chat box. Okay, B, yes, yeah. So that's the right journal entry. So whenever we receive restricted funds, we typically book it as a earmarked fund as a liability on the balance sheet. Okay, now let's understand this concept through a case scenario. Okay, suppose there is a non-profit, no, say ABC Foundation, and it is dedicated to climate change projects in India. Suppose it receives a grant of rupees 1 lakh from say donor X for an environment project. Okay, and it also receives donations totaling to rupees 2 lakhs from individuals towards generic purposes. Okay, so this is just on the income side first. A grant आया, restricted grant, 1 lakh rupees from donor X towards a specific project. And also from individual donors, it received cumulatively rupees 2 lakhs towards general purposes. Okay, now let's see how we will record these transactions in our books of accounts. Okay, now for first transaction, entry for grant received from donor X, like we saw in the reflective question that we just spoke about, we will debit bank account because money has come in, so debit the receiver bank to earmarked fund donor X. So I would want to keep this fund separately under the earmarked fund as donor X, given by donor X, and show it separately in our balance sheet in under other current liabilities. Now, the rationale behind putting this under other current liabilities is that the same liability will continues to be a liability till the time it is utilized. Till the time we utilize this money, this earmarked funds is the non-profit's liability because it is obligated to spend this money as per the donor's directions. Okay, is this clear, everyone? Anybody has any questions? Okay. Now, for the second transaction, when the non-profit receives donations from individual donors, the booking would be again a straightforward journal entry. Bank account debit, we will receive the money into our bank account, so debit the receiver, current assets will get affected on bank account, and we will book the income straight away because these are not restricted donations that we have received. We have received unrestricted donations from these individuals accumulating to 2 lakh rupees. So you will typically book it directly on your income and expenditure income side as donation individuals. So here what we always recommend is that whenever you receive donations, you should create separate ledgers for each types of or each categories of donors. So be it like individuals, or if you are receiving donations from corporates. When I say donations, these are unrestricted funds. Okay, for unrestricted funds, you have to book entire amount as your income in the year of receipt itself. Whereas in case of restricted funds, you book it as your liability and not as your income in the year of receipt. Okay, so we always recommend creating separate ledgers for each types of donors, be it corporate, individuals, the anonymous, because when it comes to filing our ITR and tax audit reports subsequently, we need this data separately. We need this information ki kitne donors individuals the, kitne donors corporates the, kitne CSR the, kitne non CSR the, and so on. So if you're following this method at the time of booking itself, it will be easier for you subsequently when you create certain reports or when you file certain filings with income tax later on. Okay, so these two transactions, are this clear? Are they clear? Anybody has any questions? 1 lakh rupees restricted funds आया और 2 lakh rupees unrestricted funds आया. I hope this is clear. Now let's move on to more transactions in the same scenario. Suppose this non-profit incurs say 50,000 rupees for project funded by donor X. Okay, so out of 1 lakh rupees that has been received as restricted fund, it incurs 50,000 rupees towards professional fees. Okay, and it also incurs 30,000 rupees towards equipment purchased from the same earmarked funds from donor X. So out of 1 lakh rupees, 50,000 have been spent towards professional fees and 30,000 rupees towards fixed assets. Now let's see how do we record these transactions and what are the peculiar things that we need to keep in mind when it comes to booking of expenses out of earmarked funds. Okay, let's take first example first. So entry for booking of expense. Can anybody just unmute and share what will you debit and what will you credit when you're booking 15,000 rupees professional fees? अब क्या डेबिट करोगे और क्या क्रेडिट करोगे एक जब भी आप एक्सपेंस बुक करोगे 50,000 रुपीस का
Professional fees account debit to vendor account.
Yes, perfect. Yeah. So you'll book professional fees debit the expense, and vendor account credit the giver under current liability. Of course, if this transaction is liable for TDS, then you will also book TDS liability, which is a vendor account debit 5,000 to TDS on professional fees. You can also pass a cumulative journal entry, professional fees debit 50,000 to vendor 45,000 to TDS on professional fee 5,000. Okay. So this will be the first entry that you will pass for booking of service expense. And subsequently, when you make the payment to the vendor, again a straightforward entry, up vendor account debit karoge to the extent of 45,000 rupees to bank 45,000. And when you pay TDS amount, again you will debit TDS on professional fees ledger and knock it off against the earlier liability of 5,000 towards TDS, and payment will go out of bank. So you'll credit the bank account, credit the giver of TDS, credit the giver for the TDS payment. Okay. Again, this journal also can be clubbed together. Yeah, vendor account debit 45 to professional TDS on professional fee 5,000 to bank account 50,000. Even that is acceptable. ये होने के बाद अब तक तो नॉर्मल बुकिंग कर रहे हैं हम प्रोफेशनल फी बुक कर रहे हैं पेमेंट एंट्री बुक कर रहे हैं बट व्हेन इट कम्स टू फंड अकाउंटिंग फॉर रिस्ट्रिक्टेड ग्रांट्स एन एडिशनल एंट्री विल गेट रिकॉर्डेड इन फंड अकाउंटिंग does anybody know what would be that additional journal
We have
that
to
you need
record
to
the income also.
yes perfect yeah so the amount that has been spent as an expense uska same equivalent amount we need to transfer from earmarked fund on our liability side to our income and expenditure on our income side. So the basic concept of like matching concept becomes critical here, that whatever amount we are spending on expense, we have to book it as no income to match it with the expenditure, so that there is no surplus or deficit that is getting recorded in our books of accounts when we spend the money from restricted funds. Okay, so the journal entry that we will pass here, an adjusting entry, that would be we will debit earmarked fund. So basically we will reduce the liability by 50,000 rupees and book it as your income, which is grant income. You will credit on your income and expenditure in your income expenditure account, and direct income it will reflect as grant income. Okay, this is one journal additional entry that we will pass. Anybody has any questions on this treatment? Okay, is this clear? Okay, let's look at the other transaction. So 30,000 has been spent towards fixed asset from the same earmarked funds from donor X. Okay, so question is, how do we book this expense? Okay, so what would be the journal entry? Normal जब भी हम fixed asset purchase करते हैं, what would be the journal entry that we will pass? What will you debit and what will you credit? So in this example, 30,000 has been spent towards equipment. Anyone? Can someone just unmute and share like what will you debit and what will you credit when you purchase a fixed asset? This is just a straightforward entry. Recording purchase of equipment. Yeah, Jilan, right. So no, you will debit equipment by 30,000 rupees and credit vendor. So debit what comes in, equipment is a real account, and vendor, personal account, credit the giver by 30, you will record it as 30,000 rupees. So straightforward entry. इसके बाद हम जब भी आप पेमेंट करोगे वेंडर को तो अगेन अ वेरी स्ट्रेट फॉरवर्ड एंट्री ऑफ पेमेंट वेंडर अकाउंट डेबिट 30,000 rupees टू बैंक 30,000 rupees. Again a very straightforward entry, but after this again a critical recording that we'll have to do, keeping in mind the fund accounting concept. What is that additional journal entry that needs to be passed after we purchase fixed asset of 30,000 rupees from the earmarked funds from donor X? Can anybody try to share what will you debit and what will you credit? जब भी आप फिक्स्ड असेट खरीदते हो earmarked फंड से तो आप नॉर्मल बुकिंग तो करोगे फिक्स्ड असेट्स परचेज का और पेमेंट्स का, लेकिन उसके बाद हाउ विल यू रिकॉर्ड दिस ट्रांजैक्शन and how will you impact the earmarked fund account on your liability side? Can anybody think of what will be the right way of recording?
We'll have
Yes,
to
Atul.
record depreciation only, right?
Depreciation is separate. That we will cover in the subsequent slide. But right now, just because we have purchased a fixed asset by utilizing the money out of the earmarked funds, what will be the corresponding effect that we'll have to give is a question.
So we can transfer it to capital account, right?
Yeah, you are somewhat right. So what we need to do is we need to transfer this equivalent amount of 30,000 from the earmarked fund to a new account, which is fixed asset capital fund. Okay, which is again on the liability side itself, but we'll have to reduce it from the restricted earmarked funds and move it to fixed asset capital fund. Because we have utilized donors fund as per the donors direction, and hence it will no longer be part of the donors earmarked fund. Now it will become part of fixed asset capital fund on the liability side in the balance sheet. Okay, so this is the additional journal entry that needs to be passed by debiting earmarked fund donor X by 30,000 rupees. This will reduce the original 1 lakh further by 30,000 rupees. तो नो पहले हमने 50,000 रुपीज प्रोफेशनल फी में यूज किया, फिर 30,000 रुपीज फिक्स्ड एसेट में यूज किया, तो बैलेंस रहेगा 20,000 रुपीज in the earmarked fund category, and this 30,000 will move from earmarked fund to fixed asset capital fund. We will look at the implications in the balance sheet and income and expenditure extract also in the subsequent slides. Let's now just focus on the journal entries for now, and then let's talk about the implications and how it will be visible in our balance sheet. Okay, is this clear, everyone? If anybody has any questions, please feel free to ask.
You
Okay.
will cover the fixed asset capital fund account treatment later slides.
Yeah. We will see what happens to this fixed asset capital fund also in the subsequent slide.
Okay.
Yeah. ठीक है, अब तक तो अभी हमने फिक्स्ड एसेट खरीदी किया. अभी उसके बाद of course there is depreciation which will get booked at the time of closing of books of accounts. Suppose on 31st March, assume there is a 15% WDV method we are following. So again a straightforward entry, depreciation account debit to equipment, which is 15% on 30,000, which is 4,500 rupees. You will pass it as you will book your depreciation expense. But the moment you book depreciation expense out of donor restricted funds, now keeping in mind the matching concept, there has to be some kind of subsequent income as well that will get recorded. in your income and expenditure, right? That's what we spoke about previously. So that will be an additional entry that will have to be recorded in our books. Can anybody think of what will be the corresponding journal that you will pass after booking of depreciation in your books to the extent of 4,500?
That fixed asset capital account to income.
Yes, perfect, yes. So now you will start reducing the depreciation amount year on year from the fixed asset capital fund that we created and move it to your income, which will be corresponding to your depreciation expense amount in your income and expenditure. Okay, this account can be named as fixed asset capital appropriation account as well, which will be recorded or become part of your direct or your income side on your income and expenditure. And fixed asset capital fund, which was original 30,000 rupees, will get reduced by 4,500 in year one. Because we transfer this amount to income side. Okay, now let's just look at how our income and expenditure and balance sheet will look like. Now this completes the entire chain of recording fixed asset purchase and subsequent depreciation from restricted funds. So our income and expenditure extract will look something like this. Okay, so if you see our original, so first we booked professional fee. It will show up on your expenditure side, and correspondingly we booked grant income for 50,000 rupees. Similarly, depreciation we booked 4,500, but uska corresponding income also we booked by using fixed asset capital appropriation 4,500 here. And in the second transaction, which is 2 lakh rupees we received from donation from individuals, we will book it as your income, and this will result in a surplus of only 2 lakhs. So if you observe this, the surplus or deficit will only get generated from unrestricted reserves. It will never get generated from restricted funds. It will always get generated from unrestricted funds only. Okay, this is one important point that we all need to understand when it comes to accounting for restricted grants. Similarly, if we see our balance sheet, those 2 lakh surplus will get carried forward to reserve and surplus under 2 lakhs. But this is something that is important for all of us to understand. Earmarked fund, जो हमने originally earmarked fund देखा, which got first it was 1 lakh rupees we received from donor X. We created a liability of 1 lakh rupees. Okay, subsequently 50,000 we booked as expense. तो उसके अगेंस्ट जो corresponding income book किया, that income of 50,000 rupees got transferred from this earmarked fund. Subsequently, we purchased 30,000 rupees towards fixed asset. Okay, so again this fixed asset purchase was a straightforward entry here on the asset side, but if you see the 30,000 rupees were to be transferred from earmarked fund to fixed asset capital fund, and this is how it will reflect in your balance sheet. So you have to move this 30,000 from restricted funds earmarked to fixed asset capital fund, and then subsequently जब भी हम 4,500 rupees depreciation charge कर रहे हैं income and expenditure and reducing from asset, corresponding effect will be from the fixed asset capital fund towards the depreciation amount of 4,500, which will get reflected on your income and expenditure income side. Okay, only then it will fulfill the matching concept principle. Now, most of the organizations, what we have observed, even though they are following fund accounting, this depreciation effect is getting missed out somewhere. And the idea of today's session is also to highlight the right treatment when it comes to the depreciation part, because depreciation is also pertaining to that portion which is coming out of the earmarked funds. basically, which are donor restricted. इसीलिए वो corresponding income booking करना जरूरी होता है in your income and expenditure. In this case, this is where we see. Otherwise, it will give a wrong picture of deficit of 4,500 in your net surplus, basically. So if you are missing out on booking this 4,500 on your income side as fixed asset capital appropriation, आपका surplus यहाँ से reduce होके 1,95,500 होगा, which is again not giving a true picture of your books. Is this clear everyone? किसी का कोई doubts है इसके ऊपर? If anybody has any doubts, I am happy to recap this portion again.
I have a doubt, Dvait.
Yeah.
So this scenario, which in the balance sheet you are showing, so basically then it will be end up like showing assets in the both side, asset side as well as the liability side. So is it the correct picture that we have to show it in the balance sheet, or because in the general scenario it is like assets always comes in the debit side and the liability is always credit side. But in this scenario it is showing like the assets is both the side, debit side as well as credit side.
Yeah. So see, assets are only this on the right hand side. This is only a fixed asset fund which is taken out from the earmarked fund to give a true picture ki after I spent 30,000 rupees from donor restricted funds, I no longer have that, so that money is no longer part of the donor restricted funds because that money has gone now, it has been spent. So this fixed asset capital fund is only a reflection of the fixed assets which are funded through a fund which is no longer restricted, basically, and hence this treatment is important. So this fixed asset capital fund is not reflection of fixed assets. It is basically showing how this fixed assets are funded. It is funded through this fund, which has come out from the earmarked fund of donor X. That is how we should read it. This kind of disclosure.
Okay, so another treatment, what generally we do is, you just correct me if it is also a correct method. We transfer this earmark fund into our income and expenditure statement, showing it as an income for your earmark funds, and then we utilize it from there. And at the end, whatever is surplus, we are again carrying it forward to the earmark funds for the next financial year.
But then that will not give a correct picture here, right? With respect to surplus or deficit, since you are saying that you end up transferring the entire money,
Not
amount.
entire money. Let's say, for example, we require in the current financial year 50,000 and we have 1 lakh of earmark fund. So we only transfer the 50,000 to our income and expenditure statement, and we utilize it, and then whatever is current financial year, we treat it like again depositing.
So as long as you are utilizing that entire 50,000 rupees, it is correct method. It is not a challenge.
Yeah. Okay. So we are following that method. We are transferring it to our income and expenditure statement, and we are utilizing it.
But that will apply only in case of revenue expenditure, not fixed asset, not capital expenditure.
Yes. We generally use it for revenue expenditure.
Revenue expenditure. Yeah. So what you are doing essentially in this example, how this 50,000 is getting treated, this is what you do, right? You transfer 50,000 rupees first as your income and then you spend it as your expenditure. So there is no surplus or deficit on this amount. That is correct. But if you are purchasing fixed asset from restricted funds, then you cannot recognize that entire amount here and your income. You will only have to record what has been correspondingly booked as depreciation in your income and expenditure. Only that much portion you will have to recognize as income. That is the correct way of booking this when it comes to fixed asset. The 30,000 when you purchase a fixed asset, you will have to transfer it to from earmarked fund to this fixed asset capital fund here instead of showing it as your income.
Hmm. Hmm.
Only then your income and expenditure will reflect correct picture. It will not show incorrect surplus or deficit.
Okay. Okay.
Suppose you book 30,000 rupees in this example on your income side, but correspondingly depreciation only will be booked for 4,500, right? So then 25,500 will get added to your surplus in this year, which is giving you incorrect picture.
Hmm. Okay. And this fixed assets capital appropriation, is it our like indirect income, you can say, in the, when you are reporting, it's an
Yeah, yeah,
indirect income
yeah,
for
yeah.
the organization?
Correct, correct. So it is basically adjustment entry. Let me put it that way. It's an adjustment entry. It's a notional income that we bring it to your income and expenditure side.
Okay. Okay.
We
So far,
basically
so we are
recognize as
not doing
income.
this. So I think,
Hmm.
yeah, so that's why, yeah, we need to
Yeah,
do
yeah.
this kind of
Yeah,
adjustment.
it will get reflected on your in your other income only, other income, indirect income only. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
it is basically a adjustment entry that we are passing.
Yeah.
Yes. Anybody else has any questions? बाकी सबको समझा ये ट्रीटमेंट हमने जो डिस्कस किया और क्यों क्यों कर रहे हैं हम क्यों हम ऐसे करते हैं when it comes to restricted funds? Does anybody have any doubt, any questions, any queries? Please feel free to share. No question is no small or big. No, a question is a question, and happy to discuss, share, and see what exactly is the the right way of doing things. Okay, I think if there are no questions, then I'm assuming that
I have one question. If
yes, yes, Dipesh.
suppose we do not show it as an appropriation account at all,
Yeah.
so it will not show a clear picture, that I understood. But will it affect to our income and expenditure statement somewhere, or like when you are carrying forward your reserves and surplus to the next financial year, so will it affect to your that reserves as well?
Yeah, so your reserve and surplus will get reduced by 4,500 rupees. Okay, so see, you will book depreciation, right? But you will not book this amount, correct?
Yes.
So because of that, your surplus will be 1,95,500,
Hmm.
and that amount you will carry it forward here.
Yeah.
Whereas in actually on ground, you have 2 lakh rupees worth of surplus, because that entire 2 lakh rupees which you have received from individual donors is your money, right?
Hmm.
That is the right amount of reserve that you are carrying forward. So
So
there it
if I
will,
want to find out the difference of depreciation where it is gone, so how I can find out, like,
as in, sorry.
as in, if it is not showing a clear picture of 2 lakh rupees, so
Huh.
if there is a deficit of 4,500, because when you enter debit and credit, it's get nullified. Okay, so why it is showing a not a correct picture? Because ultimately 2 lakh is anyways, it will be, maybe it will be remain in my bank account, or maybe it is in my fixed assets.
Correct.
So ultimately the balance will match, I guess.
So see, yeah, if you see here, okay, let's look at bank account यहाँ पे. Okay. Originally आपको 1 lakh rupees restricted funds आया था and 2 lakh rupees unrestricted funds आया. So your total was 3 lakh rupees. Okay.
3 lakh,
Then you
yes.
spent 50,000 rupees towards professional fee. Then you spent 30,000 rupees towards fixed asset. Now the balance at the end is 2,20,000 rupees.
Mm,
Correct?
yes.
Now if you see 2,20,000 reflect क्या कर रहा है? This reflects 2 lakh rupees here, which is my genuine surplus, which are unrestricted funds, and 20,000 rupees is here, sitting here. See here, under earmarked
Correct.
fund of
Earmark
donor
fund.
X.
Yes.
Okay, now in your example, what will happen? यहाँ पे 1,95,500 आ जाएगा. Okay,
Hmm.
और आपका earmarked fund ना ज्यादा दिखेगा. 25,500 दिखेगा.
Yeah, 24,500.
Correct. But it will not give the true picture, right? आपके restricted funds सिर्फ 20,000 ही बचे हैं. It is not 25,500.
Okay.
You getting it?
Hmm.
So if you're only booking depreciation but not doing this corresponding entry of 4,500 in your balance sheet, this restricted funds will be a distorted figure. It will be an incorrect figure that will come up, and it will not reconcile with your bank balance actually.
No, I think earmark fund will remain 20,000, but the fixed assets, the capital funds which you have created, because depreciation anyways,
हाँ हाँ हाँ.
debit and credit, it will go nullify.
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. So this will distort basically.
Yeah.
So okay. So the point is, so here it will show 20,000, and here it will show 1,95,500. Correct.
Yes.
But this total will not match with your bank balance technically.
Yeah. Correct. So yeah, that effects will come. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm. Okay.
Thanks for raising that point, Rupesh.
Yeah. Thank you.
Anybody else has any questions? Okay. So now that we have discussed fund accounting treatment, some key points that we all need to be aware of and mindful of. जब भी हम donor utilization reports बनाते हैं, तभी हमको ये ध्यान रखना है कि it is not just about income and expenditure statement, but also fixed assets that we purchase using donor funds will have to be should ideally get reported in your donor utilization reports, because fixed assets are recorded in your balance sheet. It is not part of your income and expenditure, but that doesn't mean that it should not get recorded in your utilization reports that you send to donors. Also, the adjustments entries, like prepaid expense ho gaya. Even though prepaid expense, you would book only the expense pertaining to the current year in your income and expenditure, and prepaid expense will show up on your asset side. But when it comes to donor utilization reports, because you would have spent that money already, you would still have to report the amount actually spent to donor, saying that your money has been spent towards so and so insurance company for the purpose. So similarly, advances हो गए, advances paid to creditors, हम एक्सपेंस नहीं बुक करेंगे, लेकिन वो एडजस्टमेंट एंट्री रहेगी बैलेंस शीट में, वो भी हमको रिकॉर्ड करने हैं. Security deposits भी बने बहुत, what we have seen from a practical perspective, there are long-term leases that are entered, like 5 years, 10 years, and donor money is spent towards security deposit, example. So it's important that you report it accordingly in your utilization report, that your money has been spent towards donor deposits, which is for say 10 years agreement, example. Even though security deposit will show up on your asset side on your balance sheet, but when it comes to reporting to the donors, it's important to call it out that way and have reconciliation statements ready when it comes to reconciling between donor utilization reports and the balance sheet, and income and expenditure, and then the books of accounts basically. Okay, same reconciliation is also required from फॉर्म 10BD, जो अभी जो फॉर्म 113 हो गया है, बेसिकली जो हम डोनेशंस के लिए जो अंडर 80G, सेक्शन 80G के अंडर हम जब भी बेनिफिट्स देते हैं डोनर को, वी फाइल फॉर्म 10BD एंड देन इशू फॉर्म 10BE. So from that angle also it's important कि what we are booking it on our books and what we are reporting in form 10BE are reconciled. 10BD are reconciled at the end. Same way when it comes to income tax return or tax void report, वहां पे भी डिस्क्लोजर होता है कि हमें कितना इनकम आया, हमने कितने लोगों को 10BD दिया. So all those reconciliations are important to be kept when we are maintaining records in whatever software that we are using, be it Tally, Zoho, or any of the software that we are using. ये सारे काम आते हैं एट द टाइम ऑफ ऑडिट, और कभी कभी स्क्रूटिनी जब भी आता है, फ्रॉम इनकम टैक्स एंगल, फ्रॉम FCRA, फ्रॉम MHA, all these reconciliations become very handy, again from a very practical perspective. Okay, some other points to remember if you're implementing this fund accounting for the first time. So your financials for last year will have to be regrouped and reclassified to some extent when it comes to income, expense, fixed asset fund, earmarked fund, and so on, to make it comparable, basically. Your opening balances of earmarked fund also will have to be reconciled, and fixed asset capital fund should also be recognized. These are some important points that you need to keep in mind when you're introducing fund accounting. Proper disclosure will have to be recorded because there will be change of accounting method that you will do for the first time. So adequately it has to be disclosed in your notes to accounts, in your financial statements, and also a disclosure on regrouping and reclassifying will be required. Of course, if you're opting for fund accounting, if you're not following and you want to opt it, because that will give a true and fairer picture basically for your financial statements, it's important that your auditor is also on the same page, because in the end the ITR tax audit report also gets audited and signed by your auditor. So before you go ahead, it's important that it is discussed with the auditors to iron out how it needs to be disclosed in the first year, so that adequate disclosures are there and even auditors are comfortable signing the audit report for your organization. So yeah, these are the key points when it comes to fund accounting. Anybody has any questions? Okay, so this brings an end to today's session. I hope there was something new to learn, or there was this was a useful session. Happy to take any questions. We still have around 15 to 18 minutes. We will have a short quiz as well, like last time. But before that, अगर किसी के कोई questions है, कुछ discuss करना है, कुछ आपके experience share करने, happy to discuss and think through before we move on to the quiz session.
Yeah, I have a question, though.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have raised it in the previous session, but since you mentioned that we are going to take it as in the fund accounting.
Yeah.
My concern is about, when we return the donation to, funder or philanthropist. So, what is the implication which we have to do, and what are the adjustment entries which we have to do it in the financial? Because ultimately it affect to our reserves, So, how to show it in the financial statement, and how the entry should be passed.
So in your example, you are saying restricted funds are refunded to the donor, correct?
Yeah, it's a multi-year donation which we have received in the first year, but it is
Correct.
for the 3 financial years. Yeah.
Correct. So see, if you are following fund accounting, so in this example, what we just talked about, 20,000 is the restricted funds lying with this NGO, correct?
Yes.
Now tomorrow, if this 20,000 rupees is to be refunded back to the donor, it will be a very straightforward booking that this account debit, earmarked fund donor account debit to bank. That's it. There won't be any implications on income and expenditure or your reserve and surplus in this example.
Okay, so we don't need to pass it, or maybe we don't need to surplus account affected. It will be like
Not at all.
directly earmark my funds to directly to this account.
Absolutely. If you are following fund accounting, if you're following
Yes,
this
yes, we
method
are
of
following.
accounting, then whatever is lying in on your liability side, see, you cannot refund back more than this, right?
Correct.
This is the money that you will be holding, and this is the maximum that you can refund. So it will be a very straightforward adjustment entry. Earmark fund to bank, that's it. It will close there.
Okay. Okay.
if in the same example, if the donor is disallowing certain expense, example, okay, and they are asking, even though you have 20,000, they are asking 30,000 to be refunded because they have disallowed certain, 10,000 rupees from, say, professional fee. Okay. Yeah, in that case, to the extent of 10,000 rupees, it will affect your reserves and surplus.
Okay. And since it is a multi-year, and we are in the first year itself, we have given them a 10 BD for let's say, for example, 1 lakh rupees in this case. So how it treated in their books of account? I just curious to understand,
Yeah,
because
yeah.
yeah.
No, it's a very good question. So you're saying in the first year you would have issued 10 BE for 10 lakh rupees, 1 lakh rupees, and in, say, third year you are refunding back, say, 20,000 rupees. So ideally the benefit should only be for 80,000 rupees.
80,000, yeah.
Right. So in that case, what I would do is that, see, in the income tax, on the income tax portal, you can still go and amend form 10 BD.
Yes.
Okay, for the previous year. So if the income tax portal allows, then certainly you should go and amend on the date on which you have that information of refunding, or probably on the date on which you refund the money, you will have to go and amend technically, so that your original form 10 BD is amended to the extent of 80,000 only, and the benefit is only passed on to of 80,000 rupees. I mean, that's the best that we can do as a non-profit in this scenario.
Okay.
Yeah, and we should reissue that form 10B again to the donor, saying that, based on the subsequent developments, reissuing you the amended 10B.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. But yeah, great question. Thanks, Rupesh, for asking. Okay, anybody else has any questions, or else we can take up the quiz. I hope everybody remembers their teams from last time. Is there anybody who is unsure which team they belong to? Can you just put it in the chat box if you are unsure? There were two teams, team 1 and team 2. सबको पता है आपके teams? किसी को नहीं पता है, please just type it in the chat box. Okay, perfect. I'm assuming everybody knows their teams. So first question for team 1. Which adjustment ensures expenses are recorded in the correct accounting period? Is it provision for expenses, capitalization, reserve creation, or fund transfer? Which of the below adjustment entries ensures expenses are recorded in the correct accounting period? Team 1, option A, B, C, D. Jinal, Nayan, Hani, A. Yes, A is the right answer. It is a provision for expense. Perfect. Okay, team 2, which fund reflects unrestricted accumulated surplus? Is it corpus fund, earmarked fund, general fund, or capital reserve? Which fund reflects unrestricted accumulated surplus? Option A, B, C, D. Team 2. Okay, most are answering C. Yes, that's the right answer. General fund. Next question for team 1. Income received in advance is shown as income, liability, asset, or reserve. Advance income, team 1. Nayan has put B. Is that a cumulative answer? Okay. Collective answer? Okay. Yes, B is the right answer, is the liability. Advance received is a liability for the non-profit. Okay, next question for team number 2. Prior period expenses should be ignored, adjusted against capital, separately disclosed, or treated as current expense. Team 2, option A, B, C, or D. Prior period expenses should be recorded as what? Team 2. Okay, D treated as current expense. Okay. Is that a collective answer? Anybody else has any different view? Rupesh, should I consider it as a collective final answer for team 2?
I'm also not sure, but I think so. It is.
Is there anybody else who, okay, Mangesh is saying adjusted against capital B. Okay. Okay, so there are two answers. Final answer क्या लूँ मैं? D या B?
treated as a 50-50.
Okay. Okay, unfortunately, both are wrong answers. So prior period expenses are disclosed separately. You know, wherever it pertains to balance sheet, yeah, income and expenditure, it has to be disclosed separately. It is not treated as current expense. It is treated as last year's, no, previous expense. It has to be disclosed separately as, a prior period item, and it is not to be adjusted against capital unless it is a balance sheet item. But again, it has to be no separately disclosed in our books of accounts, in our financial statements, basically.
Is it not a prepaid expenses? Like prior period expenses is also a kind of prepaid expenses, no? No?
No, prepaid expense concept is different. You know, prepaid expense basically you have paid the money, but you have not derived the benefits, in the current year. You are going to consume the benefits only in the subsequent period. That is prepaid expense. प्रायर पीरियड इज बेसिकली पिछले साल का या पिछले और अकाउंटिंग पीरियड का कुछ एडजस्टमेंट बाकी है या कुछ रिकॉर्ड नहीं हुआ हो, एंड दैट you cannot go back and amend your previous books which are signed and closed, right? So so those expenses you basically book it in current in the existing in the current accounting period, but you have to disclose it as this pertains to the previous period. It is not current year's expense, but it is basically previous expense only disclosed separately in your current financial statements.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, team 1, last question for team 1. Depreciation on a project funded vehicle is say 25,000. What is the correct fund accounting treatment? Will you debit general fund? Will you debit fixed asset capital fund? Will you debit grant income, or you ignore depreciation for donor funded assets? So depreciation on restricted project funded vehicle, how will you do the correct accounting, for say 20,000 rupees? Will you debit general fund? Will you debit fixed asset capital fund, debit grant income, or you ignore? Option A, B, C, or D. Jinal says B, Nayan says B. Yes, that's the right answer. You debit fixed asset capital fund, which we saw in the example that we discussed. Okay, last question for team 2 as well. Grant received for next year's activities but recorded as income in this year will result in what? Understatement of surplus, overstatement of surplus, overstatement of liabilities, or there won't be any impact? Team 2. So grant received for next year's activities, but it is received in this year and you have recorded as your income. So what will it result in? Okay, Harshil says B. Mangesh says B. Yes, that's the right answer. It will basically overstate your surplus because you will be recording your income by that much amount in the year 1 itself. Yes, perfect. Thank you so much, everyone. That brings an end to today's session.
Dohit,
Yes, Nayan.
yeah, had a question. So, like, we usually book if we are not utilizing the funds, then we book it as a liability, right, for next year.
Yeah.
So, but in this case, we like assumed it as a surplus. So isn't it wrong?
No, so this question says, so restricted grant received for next year's activities but recorded as income. Now it has been recorded as your income. Now if it is recorded incorrectly, then what will it result in?
Okay, okay, but so basically it's incorrectly recorded, but it should ideally have been liability for next year.
Correct, correct, absolutely, yeah. It should have been a liability. Now, because this is done, what will it impact? Will it understate your surplus or overstate your surplus? Basically, it will overstate your surplus because you have recorded income in the first year, whereas that grant belongs to subsequent year.
Okay, got it. Thanks.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. All right, then. Thank you, everyone, for your patience and yes, thank you for that participation. It really, it's always helpful and interesting when it becomes an interactive session. So yeah, thank you so much, everyone. So yeah, you will be like last time. You'll be getting the assessment for this session as well, and also you'll be getting the recordings and the